Welcome to the Web of Conspiracy. Here is your host, Adam Webb.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. It is great to be back with you again this week. Got a pretty good show lined up for today. I think it'll be a little different for some, maybe not everybody's cup of tea, but I know it's been a show that actually was requested a couple months back, and I decided that, of course, this being Good Friday, I thought would be a great day to release this show. So the topic for today's show is the Shroud of Turin. Now, I realize that for some who perhaps don't have any type of religious affiliation, beliefs of any kind, that this may not be as intriguing to you. Nevertheless, I encourage everybody to listen through to the end of this show. I think I have some insights into this that perhaps everybody will be able to gain something from. So, nevertheless, there are a number of you, however, who have expressed a degree of interest in me discussing this program, so I decided that I would go through with it and touch into a field that I don't always feel the most comfortable talking about. Obviously, religion, I believe, is a very personal thing. That's my own belief on that. I've never been one to judge anybody based on their religious beliefs, whether they're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Wicca, Buddhist, whatever the case may be, even atheist. Everybody's beliefs are their own. This is, for whatever reason that we're here on this planet, it's our journey, one way or another, and it's our choices that we have to make. So I've never been one to necessarily force any type of religious discussion on individuals. That being said, this is a topic that is of great question for Christians, and I think that it's certainly one that bears a little bit of discussion. So that's why I felt like that doing a show on the Shroud of Turin would be a worthwhile venture for the program. So for those of you who are, like I said, aren't as interested, bear with the program. I think that at the end I have some insights that you will definitely be able to gain something from this discussion. So before I get started, a few little things here I want to discuss. If you haven't already followed the show on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, do so. I do try to post some things on there from time to time. Was a little more active this week than I have been in the past, but nevertheless, I do post show updates on there as well. Also, check out the show's website, and that's at webofconspiracy.wix.com, and then /web-of-conspiracy. Once again, yes, I recognize that that's not the easiest to remember to type out, so bear with me while I continue to make incremental improvements to the show, and certainly the website will be one of those forthcoming here in the next hopefully few months. So please bear with as I try my best to incrementally expand the show. That being said, once again, I want to thank everybody who continues to support the show. Very impressed with the number of people that are tuning and listening. Every month the show continues to grow, so I owe all of you for that. So thank you for continuing to make this a fun thing for me to do. So, okay. A couple of things in the news that I wanted to touch on briefly. I haven't discussed much of what's been going on in the Ukraine, certainly in the eastern Ukraine with Crimea. However, a story came to surface yesterday that I felt like bared discussion, and that is the reports of the requirements Jews in the Ukraine register and pay a $50 fee or face expulsion and loss of their citizenship. This certainly hit the news wires throughout the West in the United States yesterday. After much examination and some of these other reports, it appears that appears at this point to have been false, that those reports are not in fact true. Certainly the pro-Russian groups are saying that these allegations are false. Now, the allegations stated, and these were reports from pro-Ukrainian individuals that were saying that these Russian groups were going to require Ukrainian Jews to register, and it's believed at this point that perhaps this was a move to destabilize the region, to force Jews to perhaps second-guess Russian involvement in the eastern Ukraine, and perhaps to throw their support to the pro-Ukrainian forces. So this appears to have been an effort to destabilize, but nevertheless, we'll continue to watch and monitor and see as this goes forward. Certainly, in the season of Passover, that would gather a great deal of attention from Ukrainian Jews. Nevertheless, it would appear at this point that this is just an effort to destabilize. Once again, though, it does bear watching. So we'll continue to monitor that, and we'll discuss this as it goes forward. But it just looks to have been an attempt to destabilize the Russian support in the eastern Ukraine. So we'll continue to watch that. Also, of course, the search is still continuing for the missing Malaysian Airlines flight. It would have obviously the subs that are being deployed right now aren't having any luck. There's a tremendous amount of territory to cover. So who knows where that'll go, but nevertheless, at this point, nothing's been found. So perhaps that does lead some credence to something being amiss. Nevertheless, there is an extensive amount of searching that still needs to be done, and it may take a long time before this missing airline's flight is actually found. So nevertheless, we'll continue to monitor that. Now, next month, I am planning a number of different shows and kind of get back into doing some more conspiracy, as well as doing some more shows on UFOs and extraterrestrials. I know those are very popular shows, so I'm moving back in that direction here for the month of May. That being said, I have a show planned. Now, for those of you who listen to my show on the old network that I used to broadcast on, you'll know that last May I did a show on the Bilderberg Group, and I've decided I will probably do that as a regular yearly basis. Once again, I'll be doing a show in May on the Bilderberg Group. They're meeting this May again, and this time it's in Denmark towards the end of the month. So I'll be coordinating my show right around the time of their meeting. For those of you who are unsure or don't know what the Bilderberg Group is, it is believed to be a group that is led by the most powerful, the elite, and that they make decisions and try to essentially create a new world order. That they're trying to build a one-world government, trying to build this idea of taking total control and creating the world in the image that they want. So I'll discuss that in greater detail, of course, the end of next month, but just a little heads up that it is a show I'm planning on doing here in the coming weeks. So the show for today, the Shroud of Turin, as I said, I recognize that this is not something that is a popular topic for everybody. But I believe there's enough here to require at least a little bit of delving into. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Shroud of Turin and what it is a piece of linen cloth that was believed to be a burial cloth that bears a resemblance to a man who bore wounds of a crucifixion. Further, it is believed, based on a number of secondhand reports and secondary reports throughout the ages, that this shroud was actually the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. So, of course, for Christians, this carries a tremendous amount of importance. Now, the history of this document, or the shroud, is a little shrouded, for a little bit of a pun there. I apologize. So, there's a lot that's unknown about the history in terms of their very early history. Some of the earliest documented reports of the shrine stem back to approximately the late 14th century. Even then, as these reports were coming about this potential shroud that was the burial shroud of Jesus, Even then, people of that time thought that it was perhaps a forgery. Even then, there was much question about the authenticity of the shroud. Now, in 1453, the shroud was eventually given to the House of Savoy, and they in turn, in 1578, transferred it to Turin, which is how the shroud received its name, the Shroud of Turin. It has been displayed there approximately roughly since the 17th century. At times it's been closed for public display and then reopened for numbers of reasons. The shroud actually suffered a degree of fire damage in 1532, and there were a number of concerns about potential repairs, and there are at least 2 documented cases of repair work having been done on the shroud. In 1694, as well as in 1868, there was at least some documented reports that there was repair work done then. So, we know that there's been a degree of patchwork done on this. Now, it was given ultimately to the Holy See, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is part of the Roman Catholic Church, and it was given to the Holy See in 1983. Since it's been in the Holy See's possession, essentially. Now, in 1898, some of the first photos of the shroud were taken. Now, these photos are intriguing, and the reason that they're so intriguing is that it's not so much that the image has been, more or less depicted and distributed throughout the world, but it's really a matter of what the negatives of these photos look like. Now, the negatives actually seem to demonstrate the image of what would certainly appear to match many of the descriptions of Jesus Christ. So the negative tends to garner a little more attention and certainly makes it a little easier to see. So when these photos were taken, it definitely seemed to provide a little bit more of, okay, there really is something here. Perhaps this isn't just eyes playing tricks, or I believe the term is called pareigolia, where the brain deciphers based on what they see, tries to make sense of things that are not easily made sense of. Now, as I stated, there is a great deal of question about the authenticity of the shroud. It has been debated for centuries. A number of examinations have been performed on the shroud. There was radiocarbon dating that was done in 1988 on a corner piece of the shroud, and of course this examination was done. It was an independent examination, and the material was dated between the 13th and 14th centuries. And if this were in fact, as this result would show, it would demonstrate that perhaps the shroud isn't authentic, because certainly all reports indicate that Jesus of Nazareth did not live in the 13th to 14th century. So, for many people, that's where that ended. However, there were a number of other disputed claims, and certainly those who argue that, well, perhaps that the piece that was used for the radiocarbon dating, well, perhaps that was one of the repair pieces that I had mentioned, at least in the 2 documented repairs that had been done on the shroud. So that leaves some question as to whether or not that radiocarbon dating is in fact a reliable test, at least at this particular point. Now, there was another examination done by basically it was a research project that was started in an attempt to determine the veracity, and this project discovered that there were in fact blood stains on the shroud that seemed to be consistent with crucifixion. Okay, so the markings of this crucified man, it would appear that the staining on the shroud was in fact blood. There have been other studies that have argued that, well, no, this is actually hematite, which hematite is an iron which used in ancient days, in older days, when ink wasn't so easily made and processed, hematite, when wet, would produce a rustish, a reddish type of color. So there is much debate in the number of testing, a number of tests that, okay, what exactly are we dealing with here? Some say that this is authentic. Some tests seem to indicate that perhaps it isn't. There was another test done on the dirt particulates found on the shroud, and they were examined and compared to dirt particulates found in ancient Jerusalem tombs. And this particular test I found intriguing in that it showed that they were nearly identical. The dust particulates and the dirt particulates were nearly identical in both cases, with the only exception being that the dirt particulates from the shroud showed pieces of linen, which of course you would have anticipated given that it is linen. So that test would seem to indicate that there's at least a shred of possibility that this shroud did in fact come from ancient Jerusalem. And for those who are a little unfamiliar with the idea of dirt particulates, different places throughout the world, the soil is comprised of different materials at different levels. And consistently, things can be measured to determine if this particular soil came from this particular region of the world. And as a result, this particular test seems to indicate that dirt found on the shroud does, in fact, match dirt found in ancient Jerusalem tombs, in tombs of ancient Jerusalem, going back to the time of Jesus of Nazareth. So that leads a little more possibility to, okay, maybe there is some authenticity here. Now, the shroud most recently made news back in February of this year. There was a study published that claimed that an earthquake that struck at Jerusalem actually created the image, that by releasing different gases from the earth allowed the image to form on the shroud. And furthermore, that these release of gases actually altered the radiocarbon levels on the shroud. And that is why that when the testing that has been done, at least that initial testing done in 1988, would seem to demonstrate that, in fact, it's from the 13th, 14th century. It's believed that this release of the gases from the earth altered the radiocarbon levels and gave a false reading. So, once again, there's another interesting piece that would seem to indicate that perhaps there's some veracity to this. So, we're dealing with a number of different studies, some that would seem to indicate that the shroud is, in fact, legitimate. And there are some studies that seem to indicate that it certainly could be a hoax, an elaborate forgery. So there is no real definitive answer to the question of the authenticity of the shroud. Now, the real question, in my opinion, would be that if the shroud is in fact true, if in fact it does date accurately from the time of Jesus of Nazareth, the question that still remains, and that many still argue, is that, okay, even if all of these things are true, in terms of the shroud's dating and that it actually covered someone who's crucified, do we know that this was in fact the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth? Now that is an unknown, certainly. There are a number of reports going back over 1,000 years that claim that there was in fact a burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth, of Jesus Christ, and there were stories about this circulated through much of Christianity. So the lore is there. There is enough secondary reports that this is why people believe that, okay, all of these pieces fit. So, yes, if this is true, then this is most likely the shroud, the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. The shroud itself measures approximately, I believe, about 14 feet in length, and it covers the front and then wraps around to the back. And both sides of the shroud bear the front and back images of Jesus, or at least believed to be Jesus of Nazareth or some other individual. Now, as I stated, the circumstances would seem to show that this is certainly a possibility, that this shroud does support an individual of approximately somewhere between 5'7" and 6'2" in height. Okay, that's what we know. We know that it would appear to be the image of a bearded man. All of that is there. So if, in fact, it is not a forgery, then for many, and certainly for many Christians, it's enough to believe that this is, in fact, an image of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. Now, as I stated at the top of the show, not everybody. This is not a topic that everybody is going to get behind, and as I've demonstrated, there is nothing that's entirely very definitive about the nature of what the shroud is. Is the shroud legitimate? Is the shroud a fake? There is no definitive answer. There are a number of inconclusive tests and a number of contradictory tests that would seem to indicate that perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. So we're no closer to the truth. Now, I know that there's future studies being planned, so perhaps we will get some sort of answers, and certainly with the advancements in technology, there should be at some point, hopefully here in the next 10 to 15 years, a definitive answer as to whether or not the shroud is legitimate. Now, what we won't know is whether or not the shroud is in fact that of Jesus of Nazareth, if it actually is demonstrating his image. Now, the thing that I want to point out in this, and that I mentioned too for those who don't have much interest in this topic, is that, as with most topics that I discuss on this show, and I cover a wide range of things on this show, as for those of you who've been listening now for a while would know, I think the fundamental question, what this really boils down to, as with most things on this show, it's really a question of belief. Okay? If you believe that the Shroud of Turin is the image of Jesus Christ, then that is your truth. And if you truly believe, and you completely believe, nothing that is said to you will make you believe otherwise. Now, there are some who are more neutral-minded, more scientifically oriented, and want to have evidence, proof. And if that's the case, it's certainly a little more difficult, as is with the case of many of the things that I discuss on the show. At times there's some scientific evidence to prove that perhaps there is some sort of bipedal humanoid type of entity known as Sasquatch running around. That from time to time there does seem to be evidence pointing to the possibility that certain things may exist, that there is an afterlife, that there is a paranormal, that there are ghosts, that there are demons, that there are evil entities, shadow people. There are from time to time moments of proof, but nothing very definitive. No smoking gun. So it's difficult to always say whether or not this is a truth. So my opinion is that when you come away from listening to this show, you'll come away with the thought that if you believe it is true, or you've had a personal experience supporting the topic, then you will undoubtedly believe it is true. For those who believe that they have had an experience with a ghost, have had a haunted home, they will listen to a show that I've done on poltergeists, on other ghosts, and they will come away believing in it because of their own personal experience and their own belief system. Now, for those who listen to a show that I've done on UFOs, extraterrestrials, you will come away listening to a show on that, and you will believe most everything that I've discussed, and you will have done so because of your personal experience, whether you've seen a UFO, whether you've had a personal close encounters of the third kind, you've actually made contact, or if you've been one of the fourth kind where you've been abducted or believed to have been abducted, then when I've done a show on this, you will come away from believing it to be true because of your personal experience. So, for those who are Christians who listen to the show on the Shroud of Turin, you will have listened to this, and you will have had enough evidence and enough belief in knowing what the Bible has said that Jesus Christ has done, and you will believe the stories that have been said, and you will come away believing that the Shroud of Turin is in fact truth. You will not need to have the scientific evidence to support. Not necessarily. It won't be a necessity for you to have it. It would just be a bonus to have it. And I think that for many people, this is the case for a lot of things. Yes, there are exceptions, and there are plenty of people and scientists who have to have the definitive scientific proof, and they will not believe otherwise unless they've had a personal experience. And for those who've had a personal experience, then it becomes something more. And for those who've accepted Christianity as their faith, it is a very personal experience for them. No different than somebody who practices Judaism or follows Muhammad or is a practicing Buddhist or Wicca. If you take that faith and you carry that faith, then very little can be done to convince you otherwise, unless you are faced with a personal experience that seems to contradict, or you have come to a point where you're faced with such evidence that you cannot overlook it. The thing is that for as little scientific evidence as there is to prove these things that I discuss on the show, there is equally little evidence to completely disprove the topics that I discuss on the show. So that's where we are when we discuss UFOs, extraterrestrials, Sasquatch, shadow people, poltergeists, the jinn, whatever the case may be, and all of the different topics that I've discussed on the show. It boils down to faith and belief and personal experience. Now, some people might be offended that I've equated religions with a lot of these other topics. And that's certainly not my intention. My intention was not to offend by equating them to these other unknown topics. The truth is there is a great deal of mystery surrounding religion. There's a great deal of mystery surrounding our world. And that is what I celebrate on this show, is the mystery, the unknown. What if is the central question to this show. What if the jinn are real? What if extraterrestrials are in fact abducting people? What if that is what the show has been about for me, and creating a platform where people can feel comfortable talking about it. So for me to bring in a topic about religion, it's not intended to offend anybody. I have tried, when I have discussed religions on the show, I have tried my best to provide a fairly broad discussion and an inclusive discussion, because I believe that there is much to be included rather than excluded. So, the Shroud of Turin. Yes, there is conflicting evidence. Is it real? Is it authentic? I don't know. Coming from a scientific standpoint, I don't know. I am uncertain that it's true. It could very well have been a very devout follower who wanted to create this shroud in the image of Jesus to celebrate his or her faith in Jesus Christ. And this shroud could have transferred hands through the years, been misinterpreted, been by those who maybe wanted to make something more of it, maybe wanted to create something greater than what it is. Perhaps they wanted to embellish and have taken this artistic piece of work and turned it into a religious, or attempted to turn into a religious relic. Maybe that's the case. However, as I have discussed, there is enough scientific evidence to support the possibility that it is in fact true. As inconclusive as all of this is, you couple that with secondhand reports, stories, then I have to maybe think that perhaps, yes, there is something to this, that it is in fact real. Couple that in with my own personal experience, my own personal belief, my own faith system. Yes, I would tend to think the shroud is legitimate, that it is in fact showing the image of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. That is no different than those who have reported seeing extraterrestrials going back over hundreds of years. Those who believe that extraterrestrials have made contact, the stories of the flying objects, the depictions in art, touching a little bit into the ancient astronaut theory here. What is the difference in someone who claims to have had these experiences, and we don't throw those out? Then we certainly can't throw out the stories of the shroud from over a millennia. There is perhaps something here. Is it scientific? No. Not completely. But there's enough there to make me wonder. It is neither proven nor disproved entirely yet. And until that time comes, I will base that based on my own personal experience. So yes, I would tend to argue that there is something here. That it is, in fact, a legitimate possibility that this shroud depicts the image of a crucified Jesus Christ. So, for everybody else, it is up to your individual interpretation. That's the beauty of all of this. That's the beauty of why I do this show. I don't anticipate everybody to agree with me. I don't want everybody to agree with me. What I do want is I want you to be able to listen to this show and come away with an open enough mind to question the possibility. It's everybody's own decision to determine whether or not that they believe, and whatever it is that they believe in. And that being the case, I certainly wouldn't expect everybody to believe just because I believe. What I do think is that everybody should be open enough to discuss the possibility of what this actually is, and not be closed off enough to assume that it is just a forgery. No different than discussing openly extraterrestrials, Sasquatch, shadow people, all these other different topics that I've discussed. So, well, that's what I have for everybody today. Now, as a reminder, next week, I'm not even sure that I discussed this, but I've got a number of shows in planning going into the month of May. I'm getting back into UFOs, extraterrestrials, as well as different conspiracies, government conspiracies, things of that nature. But next week, I've got a pretty cool episode. I'm tentatively calling it Cryptids Galore. I'm going to talk about a few different cryptids. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on necessarily one individual one, but I'm going to touch on a few, some of the more popular cryptid-like creatures, such as, let's see, the chupacabra being one of those. So we'll discuss the glorious world of cryptids and cryptozoology next week. So for those of you, my Jewish listeners, happy Passover. For my Christian listeners, be Good Friday and happy Easter. And I will be back with you next Friday.